The U.S. aircraft carrier forward deployed to Japan is back at sea for trials after its annual repair period and ahead of its spring patrol in the Western Pacific. USNI News has learned USS Ronald Reagan, CVN-76, left on Monday from its berth in Yokosuka following an extended quarantine period for the crew of the carrier, as well as its escorts, as part of the Navy's attempts to keep the COVID-19 virus off of the carrier, service officials confirmed earlier this week. Like the West Coast Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, Task Force 70 ordered the crew into a restriction of movement (ROM) period in Japan ahead of the sea trials. At the conclusion of the ROM period, U.S. 7th Fleet discovered several asymptomatic positive COVID-19 sailors in the quarantine crew and kept them off the carrier. The Navy did not disclose the number of cases, but the New York Times reported there have been at least 16 positive cases from sailors assigned to Reagan. The quarantine period ahead of deployment is one of the lessons the Navy is absorbing from the outbreak on USS Theodore Roosevelt, CVN-71, that has sidelined the carrier in Guam since March 27. The carrier reported more than 1,000 positive cases stemming from what started out as just a handful of infected sailors. Curbing infections on deployed ships has become a top priority for the Navy. We have an enormous respect for this virus. It's insidious, and the reason why it's insidious is the asymptomatic spread, Vice ADM Richard Brown, the commander of Naval Service Forces in Naval Service Force Pacific, told USNI News in an interview Friday. The underway comes as senior leaders have warned of increased Chinese military activity in the South China Sea. We continue to see aggressive behavior by the PLA in the South China Sea, from threatening a Philippine Navy ship to sinking a Vietnamese fishing boat and intimidating other nations from engaging in offshore oil and gas development, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper told reporters at the Pentagon on Tuesday. In turn, the U.S. has stepped up presence operations in the region, including conducting 2 freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea in April. Additionally, while Roosevelt was pierside in Guam, amphibious warship USS America, LHA-6, operated off the coast of Malaysia near a mineral claim dispute between Jakarta and Beijing following the completion of sea trials. Reagan will begin its Western Pacific patrol. I think it means a lot not only to our sailors of our strike group but also to our nation as a whole and our partners and allies that we get Reagan back to sea and back out on deployment where she belongs, Task Force 70 Commander Rear ADM George Wickoff told Stars and Stripes on Friday. Beijing has adopted several methods to bring SCS under its control, which include creation of domestic laws and administrative units for the disputed region to assert its claims, extension of the existing features through the land reclamation process, militarizing the islands, aggressive patrolling of the claimed region to deter other disputants, harassing the fishermen even in the eases of other nations, objecting the drilling operations by other nations, applying economic carrots and sticks to manage other disputants, etc. Beijing has the perception based on its 3 warfare strategy that through continuous and aggressive propaganda, a stage may be achieved when the world including other disputants could be forced to accept the Chinese claims. Hence, in a systematic manner it started with the cartographic aggression. It began to project in its maps that the 9-dash line represented its sovereignty. Recently, China issued new names for 25 islands and reefs and 55 underwater entities in the SCS to assert its claims over them. This was followed by the establishment of 2 districts to administer Paracel and Spratly in the SCS. Research stations have been established on Fiery Cross and Subi reefs. These are disputed areas which are claimed among others by Vietnam and the Philippines. However, the misinformation is aggressively spread through various means to project that these areas belong to China. This standoff between the Chinese and Malaysian vessels has been going on since December 2019 and is the latest development in a series of targeted harassment by the Chinese vessels of drilling operations in 5 oil blocks off the Malaysian coast. A Chinese government survey vessel, the Haiyang Z8, has been operating close to a drill ship under contract to Malaysian state oil company Petronas. In February 2002, China warship targeted the BRP Conrado Yap of the Philippines near Malampaya gas field in the West Philippine Sea. In addition, the coercive diplomacy plays a significant part to deal with other disputants. Besides tempting them with financial aid, often China stops or threatens to stop commercial deals to compel other states to change their policies toward China. Recently, Pompeo raised serious concerns over the scientific report indicating that China's upstream dam operations have unilaterally altered flows of the Mekong River that can cause droughts in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam. This appears to be a new weapon in the armory of China. China has also been modernizing its naval force, which has emerged as a major force within China's near seas region, and it is conducting a growing number of operations in more distant waters, including the broader waters of the Western Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and even in waters around Europe. China wants its navy to be capable of acting as part of a Chinese anti-access area denial, A2/AD. Force, a force that can deter U.S. intervention in a conflict in China's near seas region over Taiwan or some other issue. This gives China a major tool to intimidate smaller disputants. The foregoing activities have pushed the smaller disputants to strongly protest against the Chinese provocative activities. While Vietnam has lodged a complaint with the UN, the Philippines has filed 2 diplomatic protests with China over the violations of international law and of the Philippines' sovereignty in the West Philippine Sea. Malaysia in December 2019 had requested to the United Nations, UN, to stretch its boundaries beyond the normal 200 nautical miles. The above actions suggest that China is prepared for escalation and that it is not serious for resolution of the issue through negotiations. Diplomatic talks are aimed at buying time for strengthening its claims. This key judgment needs to be understood by other claimants. While these protests may take some time to be taken up, the immediate need is to contain the Chinese aggressiveness in the SCS. Some suggestions have come up from the involved nations. Retired Philippine Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carbrio rightly suggested that it is time that the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia and Indonesia reach out one another in view of the recent China's harassment in their waters, particularly in the oil fields. He suggested joint patrolling by these nations. A unified strategy of Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines and Indonesia is indeed central to containing China. The joint patrols would send a strong message to China to stop provocative steps. At the same time, the countries like us, Japan, Australia and India should be providing assistance to these countries and should be prepared to join their patrols occasionally whenever required. The region is strategically important for external powers as well. Any change in the strategic balance could be damaging for all.